Welcome back, everybody. Today we're putting the pedal to the metal with a deep dive into the auto industry.
Oh, yeah.
Buckle up, because we're looking at a bit of a bumpy road ahead for Nissan and the really, quite frankly, shocking rise of Chinese electric vehicles.
Yeah.
You guys sent in some really, really fascinating stuff. And one thing that really stood out to me was that China could be handling something like 70% of the world's battery recycling.
Wow.
Like, is that not insane? We're going to get into all of it.
It is a really staggering figure, and I think it speaks to a much larger trend that we're seeing.
Okay.
The global auto industry is in the middle of this huge transformation.
Yeah.
And to really understand, where we're going, I think we need to understand these shifts that are happening right now.
Totally. And to kick things off, I think we should start with Nissan, because the article you sent in, it pulls no punches. They are facing some really serious issues financially.
Yeah.
They're closing factories, they're scaling back operations in a lot of really key markets.
Yeah.
So what's going on? What's at the root of this downturn? Is it just a Nissan problem, or is it something bigger?
It's a bit of both, I'd say.
Okay.
Nissan's definitely got its own internal issues, but I think their struggles also reflect, the broader challenges that a lot of these traditional car companies are facing as they're trying to adapt to this whole electric revolution.
Like this classic disruption thing, right?
Yeah, it's a classic disruption scenario where you have these big established players.
I get comfortable.
And they're kind of slow.
Yeah, and they're slow to adapt. Yeah, and speaking of adapting, the article mentioned how Nissan was actually ahead of the curve with their EV, the Leaf, back in 2010.
Right.
It seemed like revolutionary at the time.
It did, yeah.
It did.
But there was a big snag.
Yeah, what happened there?
The battery technology was great at the time, but it turned out that it needed really expensive repairs after only 700 kilometers.
Oh, wow.
And I think this shows, that being first doesn't always mean winning, especially when the technology isn't quite there yet.
It's not enough to just be first, you got to get it right.
Exactly.
And while Nissan was dealing with these EV growing pains, China's electric vehicle market was taking off like a rocket.
Yeah, it totally exploded.
I mean, 2023 alone, they sold 8 million EVs.
Yeah.
That's 60% of global sales.
Unbelievable.
It's wild. And they even surpassed Japan as the world's largest auto exporter now.
That was a huge moment for them.
It's like, whoa, okay, China.
Yeah, they're a force to be reckoned with now.
And it's not just about the sheer volume of cars either.
Right.
The article talks about how Chinese EV brands are really making a name for themselves in Europe and Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
They're even challenging Tesla.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised to learn that in Jordan, EVs make up 45% of car sales.
Really?
45%.
Wow.
It seems like government policies are playing a huge role in making that happen.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think Jordan's a great example of how governments can use things like incentives and import policies to really speed up the adoption of new tech.
Right.
But China's success, I think it's more than just smart policies. They've been very strategic. They're thinking long-term about this.
Okay, so the article breaks down some of these key ingredients in China's EV recipe.
Okay.
Affordability, first and foremost, driven in part by their control of the battery supply chain. And then you have government subsidies.
Huge government subsidies.
Massive. Over $200 billion injected into the sector.
Wow.
But can it be more than just money, though, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What else is going on?
What I think is really amazing is how China's focused on building a whole ecosystem around EVs.
Yeah.
They're not just making cars, right? They've secured access to all these raw materials. They've invested in battery production. And they're even already working on battery recycling.
They're thinking ahead.
Yeah, they are. They're thinking long term, and it shows.
It's almost like they've created this vertically integrated closed loop system.
It is.
So while Nissan was playing catch up with early EV tech, China was busy setting up the whole board.
Yeah, the whole playing field.
So given this massive head start, can Nissan and other traditional car makers even catch up at this point?
I mean, that's the question everyone's asking.
Yeah.
The article mentioned Nissan's plan to merge with Honda.
Right.
And I think that could be a good move for them.
Okay.
Combining resources, maybe they can speed up their EV development, but they're up against some really stiff competition.
It's like David and Goliath.
It is.
And I'm really curious to see how this plays out.
Me too.
The article really focused on cars, but this whole EV revolution, it's bigger than just cars.
Way bigger.
It impacts everything.
It does. It touches so many parts of our lives.
And it's making me think about all the other industries that are going to be affected by this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's not just the auto industry.
Energy production, our cities, even geopolitics.
Exactly.
This is a real deep dive.
It is a deep one.
And it sounds like we have a lot more to unpack. So should we dive into some of these bigger implications?
Yeah, let's do it. You know, it's really interesting to think about all the ways this shift to electric vehicles is going to impact our lives.
It is.
Right? It really is. It's like this ripple effect.
Okay, so what kind of ripple effects are we talking about here? Give me an example.
Well, think about energy production.
Okay.
As more people switch to EVs, the demand for electricity is going to go way up.
That makes sense.
And this could actually be a good thing because it could accelerate the move to renewable energy.
Right. We need to power these cars somehow.
Exactly. It wouldn't make much sense to have all these electric cars on the road and still be burning coal to charge them.
No, absolutely not.
So this is a chance to make our energy grid cleaner.
Right.
And it's not just about where the energy comes from.
Boy.
We also need to think about the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like, we can't just plug all these EVs into our regular outlets, right?
No, definitely not.
We're going to need a ton of new charging stations.
Yeah.
Not just in homes, but in public spaces, workplaces, along highways, everywhere.
It's a huge undertaking.
It is. It's going to require a lot of investment and some really innovative thinking when it comes to things like grid management and smart charging tech.
It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about the scale of the change.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're building a whole new ecosystem for EVs, just like China's been doing.
Exactly.
But on a global scale.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really fascinating aspect of this whole EV thing.
Okay, I'm listening.
Geopolitics.
Ooh, geopolitics. Now this is getting serious.
It is. This is the big picture stuff.
Okay, so how do geopolitics factor into all of this?
Well, as the EV market grows worldwide, the countries that control the supply chains for those key materials,
like lithium.
Yeah, like lithium, cobalt, nickel, all those things, they're going to have a lot of power.
It's like a new kind of resource race.
It is. It's almost like the oil wars of the 20th century.
Wow.
But now it's all about these EV materials.
So it's not just about who makes the best cars anymore.
Right.
It's about who controls the stuff you need to make the cars.
Exactly.
And suddenly those battery recycling efforts that China's been making,
Yeah.
those seem really smart.
Very strategic.
They're positioning themselves as a leader.
Yeah, they're playing the long game.
And in a way that's good for the environment.
That's the key. They're doing it sustainably.
So they're kind of winning on all fronts.
It seems that way.
Okay, but let's bring it back to Nissan and some of these other traditional car companies.
Okay.
What can they actually do to catch up in this race?
Right.
The article mentioned they're planning new models, setting timelines. But is that enough?
Timelines are important, but they're not the whole story.
Okay.
I think these companies need to be bold.
Bold how?
They need to innovate. They can't just play it safe anymore.
What do you mean?
They might even need to disrupt their own business models.
Okay.
They need to embrace new technologies. And I think they need to be open to new partnerships.
Okay, so the article did mention that Nissan's thinking about merging with Honda.
Right.
And that maybe collaborations could be key.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that. What kind of partnerships could actually make a difference here?
Well, partnerships are a great way to speed up innovation and to pool resources.
Makes sense.
Think about it. Traditional automakers are really good at making cars.
Right. They've been doing it forever.
Exactly. They know how to design them, manufacture them, distribute them. But then you have these tech companies that are really good at software, AI, battery tech.
Right. So they each have their strengths.
Exactly. So if they can work together, they can create something even better.
It's like building a dream team.
Yeah, exactly. A dream team for the EV era.
I like that.
Yeah.
But even with the best tech and the best partnerships, wouldn't we need to get consumers on board too?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, if people aren't convinced about EVs, the whole thing kind of falls apart, right?
Yeah, you're right. Consumer education is crucial. People need to understand why EVs are good, not just for the environment, but for them personally.
Right.
They need to know about the performance, the cost savings, the whole experience of driving an EV.
It's about getting people excited about this change.
Exactly. It can't feel like they're being forced into it.
Right. It has to be something they want.
Yeah, it has to be appealing.
Okay. So it's not just about building the cars. It's about building excitement.
Right.
This is a huge undertaking.
It is.
So many moving parts, so many people involved.
It's complex.
Yeah, it's almost overwhelming.
It is a complex landscape, but it's also full of opportunity. And the more we understand all of this, the better prepared we'll be for what's coming.
Right. And speaking of understanding all of this, you mentioned battery recycling earlier.
I did.
And the article said that China could be handling 70% of the global market by 2030.
Yeah.
That's huge.
It is a really significant number.
What does that mean for everyone else?
I think it shows that China's thinking long term. They're not just focused on making the cars. They're planning for what happens to them at the end of their life.
The whole life cycle.
Exactly. They want to recover those valuable materials.
Right.
It's this idea of a circular economy. And that's really important for a sustainable EV industry.
So it's not just about building new stuff.
No.
It's about reusing what we already have.
Exactly. We need to think about the whole system.
It's like a new gold rush is about to start, but for lithium and cobalt and all those battery metals.
You got the demand for battery recycling is going to be huge.
And that's a huge opportunity for anyone who's ready for it.
Absolutely.
You know, it's funny, this article started out talking about Nissan in China, but it's really opened up this whole conversation about the future.
It has.
Transportation, energy, geopolitics.
All connected.
And it's making me think about the choices we make as consumers.
Yeah.
And how those choices have these ripple effects.
They do. They really do.
And it's all connected.
Everything is connected.
This has been an eye-opening conversation.
It has.
So we've talked about the opportunities and the challenges, but are there any risks we should be thinking about too?
That's a really good question, and I think it's an important one. Yeah, there are definitely some potential downsides that we need to be aware of.
Okay, so lay it on me. What kind of risks should we be thinking about?
Well, one concern is the whole issue of ethical sourcing.
Okay.
You know, we've been talking about lithium, cobalt, all these materials that go into EV batteries.
Right.
But mining those materials can have a big impact on the environment.
Yeah.
And on communities, especially in countries that don't have strong environmental regulations.
So even though EVs are supposed to be good for the planet,
right,
there's a chance they could actually cause problems in other ways.
Yeah, it's a bit of a paradox. We have to be careful that we're not just shifting the problem from one place to another.
Right. So it's not enough to just switch to EVs.
Yeah.
We have to make sure that the whole process is sustainable.
Exactly. We need to think about the whole supply chain.
From the mine to the factory to the recycling plant.
Exactly. We need transparency and accountability at every step.
And what about jobs? I mean, we've talked about all the new jobs that could be created in battery production and recycling and all that. But what about the people who are currently working in traditional car factories?
Right.
Could this shift actually lead to job losses?
There is a risk of that, and I think it's something that governments and companies need to address proactively.
What can they do?
Well, they need to invest in retraining programs.
Okay.
Help workers transition to new roles within the EV sector or in other industries.
It's about making sure that no one gets left behind.
Exactly. This transition needs to be just and fair.
Okay, what about infrastructure? We've talked about needing all these charging stations.
Yeah.
But is that even realistic?
That's a good question.
Especially in developing countries or rural areas where the infrastructure might not be as developed.
Right, and I think that's where we could see a kind of digital divide emerge, where only people who have access to reliable charging can really benefit from EVs.
So we need to make sure that everyone has access.
Exactly. Equity is key.
Okay, what about cybersecurity?
Ooh, that's a big one.
I mean, these EVs are like computers on wheels, right?
They are. They're becoming increasingly connected, and that opens up a whole new set of vulnerabilities.
So they could be hacked.
Potentially. Yeah. We need to make sure that these systems are secure and that people's data is protected.
A lot to think about.
It is. This transition to EVs is complex.
It is. It's exciting, but it's also really complex. But I think this deep dive has been incredibly valuable.
Oh, I agree.
We've explored the opportunities, but also the challenges.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important.
It is.
So where do we go from here?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that the future of mobility is in our hands.
Okay.
We need to stay informed. We need to ask critical questions.
Right.
And we need to be engaged in this conversation.
It's a collective effort.
It is. We all have a role to play in shaping the future we want.
Wow. That's a really powerful message.
I think it's an important one.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a truly illuminating conversation.
I agree.
And I hope our listeners have learned a lot about this incredible transformation that's happening in the auto industry and beyond.
And hopefully they're feeling inspired to be part of the solution.
Exactly, because the future is electric.
It is, and it's full of possibilities.
So buckle up, everyone. It's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting.